I want to raise these issues before we hear from Mr. Van Ark and Mr. Newman, because I don't want to sandbag them. I don't want them to come, speak, leave the table, and then offer my comments. So I want to both lay out some observations and some concerns so that we can hear from the LAO if they care to comment, and also to tee up a response, if they'd like, from the folks at either the High-Speed Rail Authority or Cambridge Systematics. It's hard to express my frustration adequately in terms of where we are today on these issues. Seems to me, Mr. Chairman, you and I were having the same conversation a year and a half, pushing 2 years ago. We have heard now concerns expressed by our independent, nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office, by our state auditor, by the Institute of Transportation Studies, and now by the Inspector General. These are 4 disparate organizations. Each one of them is highly regarded in my observation. Each one of them is nonpartisan. Each one of them has no axe to grind. It doesn't mean that their assessments or evaluations are perfect, without error. Doesn't mean that people don't have opinions. They rather obviously do. None of us is wholly objective when we have these conversations. But a year and a half, 2 years into this series of conversations, we've got 4 disparate organizations outside the political realm of the legislature that has expressed concern about the way this project is moving forward. You know, ordinarily, you would think that that would give folks some reason for pause and some incentive to step up the quality of their deliverables. I'm not seeing that. Are you seeing that?
Senator, I'm not sure how to respond to that.
Well, let me take you back to the conversation we had. I think it was at the beginning of this year, back in January, when we did have those budget conditions that were in the 9-10 budget, to which one of which was that we get a business plan that could more reasonably be called a business plan. And my recollection of the conversation we had in January of this year was that the sense was that it was better, but still not good enough. And there was a general sense that the authority had sort of done just barely the minimum it needed to do in order to get over the next hurdle. Is that a fair characterization?
It was the revised business plan was certainly better than the business plan before. It provided more information and was more helpful. Some of the information that was provided was questionable in the way that confidence intervals, for example, weren't provided. Some of the assumptions were hard to understand and were not justified very well. But they're certainly making progress. Are they to the point where they've provided us a business plan that lays out the argument for the state to continue to fund this project? That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Well, I guess the point I want to underscore, and this is not a request for response to this one, Mr. Chairman, is both here in the Capitol, but certainly back home in our districts, there's some question about why you or I or other members of the legislature have raised these concerns. The point I want to underscore is we've got not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 different, well-regarded, objective, independent, professional organizations who've said, hang on, there are serious issues that need to be resolved before we move forward. And what we heard earlier was, here we are at that 6-month point for the auditor, and less than half of the deliverables that were anticipated, expected, and committed to, are not forthcoming. So that's the first observation I want to make. The second observation I want to make is, with respect to our friends from ITS, I was thinking, as I listened, I remember now why I dropped my statistics class, and why the notion of a game theory class seemed altogether unappealing, as appealing as the issues were on a more abstract, less algebraic basis. But we are not. I can't speak for my colleague, but we are not. I certainly am not. In spite of some planning background, a statistician or a modeler. And so, at some point, we're rely on a modicum of trust and a measure of good faith. That has become increasingly difficult to do over the past 2 years, in part because of the lack of responsiveness that we've seen to these 4 very legitimate expressions of concern, but also because of other issues that remain unresolved. We've got a letter dated April 23rd from our Legislative Counsel's office. Here again, these are nonpartisan professionals who are there to provide the legislature on an unbiased and nonpartisan basis with their best legislative counsel and legal judgments. And going back to April 23rd, we've got a letter about this issue of dual office holding, incompatible offices, and there's nothing ambiguous about the language of the letter. The letter says, accordingly, it is our opinion that an individual who is the mayor of the city of Anaheim or a voting member of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority may not simultaneously serve as a member of the High-Speed Rail Authority under the common law doctrine of incompatibility of public offices that is now codified in Section 1099 of the Government Code. That was followed up on July 30th by a letter to Rolf Van Ark, the Chief Executive Officer, regarding potential incompatibility of offices. And language in the letter says, we urge your potentially affected members to review the relevant law for themselves in light of any public offices they may hold, in addition to their HSRA memberships, and to take appropriate steps to clear up any lingering issues. Now, that was 3 months ago. And I'm not aware that the issues have been resolved. I'll be curious to hear what, if anything, happened this morning. But that makes it that much more difficult to operate with a sort of a sense of good faith and trust in terms of making these issues go forward.